who wants to join will be able to, and we make this public for later and future reference for other interested applicants, just in case people were unable to attend this session. So this conversation is recorded. I also want to point out that I have muted, as the host, I've muted all participants, just because I know from prior experiences that sometimes people forget to mute themselves and we get to hear dogs and kids and car horns and all kinds of things. And I want to be able to be clear with the answers and hear your questions clearly. So in a moment, we will get to those questions. Quickly, I want to also remind everybody that we will not be able to do any specific coaching. So I won't be able to provide specific guidance, in the details of a particular proposal. What I can do is answer questions that are in generalities and to help you understand how your proposal should look, not exactly what it should contain, and to clarify any points that are contained in the Notice of Funding Opportunity as posted on the website. In the chat box, I have posted the link to that funding opportunity, just if you want to check and make sure that you're in the right conversation, because we do have more than one funding opportunity open. They are all listed on the website, the U.S. Embassy in South Africa's website, under Public Diplomacy Funding Opportunities. If you click on that link, you'll see a whole bunch of, well, I think only a couple at this point, but that's where we post all of our funding opportunities. If something's not there, that means it's not open at the time, but do keep checking, and we always post our funding opportunities on social media. So if you're not following us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Twitter, this might be a good time to consider doing that, because we continually update those social media platforms when new funding opportunities are made available. So with that, I will start with a short presentation, and I'm going to try to share my screen to make sure that you can all see what this short presentation that provides some guidelines about how we evaluate what we look for in different proposals. So let's see if it will share. Okay, can you all see my screen? Can somebody give me a thumbs up? Somebody who has their camera on, maybe give me a thumbs up if you can see that, or let me know in the chat box if you can see that. Let me see if I can make this better. Okay, so when we look at federal awards, we often say grants, and grant can mean a bunch of different things. When we say grants, we might mean three different things. We might mean a fixed amount award, an actual grant, or a cooperative agreement. In the Notice of Funding Opportunity for this one, we haven't really specified, because it will depend on the nature of the work that we're going to do, and the impact on the partners, the impact on you as applicants, is fairly minimal, depending on how we decide to structure it. And that's part of the conversation that will happen with your grants officer as we move through the process. The type of funding can, as I mentioned, be a fixed amount award, a grant, or a cooperative agreement. As we read from left to right of this screen, the amount of our involvement as an embassy and your grant officer and your program officer and your grant officer representative increases. So a fixed amount award is the least amount of involvement. In fact, there's much lower reporting requirement with a fixed amount award. A grant is somewhere in the middle, so I'll leave that one for now. We can come back to that later. And a cooperative agreement is where there's a lot of involvement, substantive involvement of the grant officer and of the embassy in general in the award. I will say that many times, if you're a first-time applicant, you will be working with us under a cooperative agreement. That is due to both the, if you're new, or to the shape and substance of the award, depending on what we want to accomplish together. I do want to pause here and say that we are public diplomacy, and we really view that these awards are partnerships. So it's highly collaborative, highly cooperative. We're working together to do something that serves our purposes, which are clearly outlined in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, but also helps you advance what you're doing as well. And where we see that partnership play out, we both get good results. And we find that cooperative agreements are most productive for ensuring that the partnership really truly functions the way a partnership should, rather than a contractual agreement where maybe we don't have as much involvement and the results aren't quite as relevant to us. We're learning a lot of new things. We're adjusting to new circumstances, as many organizations are. And I think cooperative agreements gives us a chance to really understand what the benefit of the collaboration is in ways that maybe the lower reporting burden in a fixed amount award does not. So we can come back to that if there are questions. I'm going to move ahead. Public diplomacy funding opportunities are unique within the embassy. If you have worked with USAID before, if you have worked with any other US government agency, but not the public diplomacy section, you will find that we are very distinct and very different. I want to point out that the things that we're doing, there's the link, the embassy, and then the public diplomacy funding opportunities, as I mentioned before. It's also in the chat box. We are a policy communications organization. That means there's a lot of things we do not do. That means there's a lot of things that we have flexibility to do that some of our other US government organizations and agencies within South Africa and in every country have different flexibilities and different capacities to do. So just to understand, you're speaking today with the public diplomacy section. We do cultural affairs, which people often ask us, what is cultural affairs? That is really the part that builds the understanding between people of the United States and South Africa. And then we also deal with press. So when we have policy messages or embassy initiatives that we'd like to communicate, we work with the press. So press organizations are also quite important to us. And you'll see in the APS that communications is a big part, or at least a part of what we intend to work on. Let's see. Whoops, I've skipped one. Okay, there are specific things that we absolutely cannot do. And you can see that here in this chart. It's also listed for you in the funding opportunity. And anything in the we cannot category really kills a proposal. These are the things that we just cannot do. And I want to make sure that it's clear we are not a development organization. And while we are very concerned with development outcomes, our resources do not align with those outcomes. So if you're an organization more focused on development and what you're doing does not contain American content, and I'll cover that in just a moment as well, it's going to be really tough for us to be able to collaborate with you because development objectives are not the objectives of a public diplomacy section. I want to cover American content here a little bit before we get into the technical parts of SAM's and DUN's registration. American content means there is some substance that connects the outcomes and the outputs of this partnership to the United States. Maybe you work with a US partner, maybe you bring in, if you want to do a poetry contest, maybe you do that poetry contest based on the Declaration of Independence or Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech, or you review a US piece of American literature or history. These are really important substantive components, and it gets a little hard sometimes to understand what that would look like. It doesn't simply mean that you're either doing it at an American space or there's an American in the room. We need to see more connectivity between the United States and South Africa around the theme that the program is intended to support or to enhance. So as you submit an application, if we find that it is qualifying and doesn't contain any of the things we cannot do, one of the other things we will work with you on, and we understand that it's often difficult to understand the concept, especially if it's your first time collaborating with the public diplomacy section. One of the things we will work with you on is how that American content is really substantive and meaningful and really conveys a sense of what it is we as a public diplomacy section are trying to accomplish. So that may not be perfect in your proposal. We don't expect perfection. We look for good ideas that we can build on, but we also will need to ask for your flexibility and your understanding that we need proposals that will draw out that American content in meaningful and substantive ways. SAM's and DUN's registration. If you've read the notice of funding opportunity, you can see there's a lot of rules, and these are requirements. We get it. We know that it's hard. We will not do it for you. There are plenty of organizations that have done this and have done it successfully. It seems daunting at first. It is not. I want to emphasize there are lots and lots of scams. It is completely free. There is no cost. A lot of organizations or websites will say, oh, we'll do your SAM's registration for you or SAM registration for you for a fee of $40 US. that is not required. You can do it yourself. Many organizations have. And one of the things that we're looking at is how do we help and coach, how do we put our current partners in touch with our future partners to help and coach them. We as an embassy cannot do that. That is incumbent upon the organization, but we might know organizations that have done it successfully. And in some cases, we'll be able to, provide or ask them to provide some insight about that process. It's not hard. The details are really important. All your information must match. If you've registered once before and you put that you were on 15th Street and now you put that you're on 15th Road, you're not going to get a renewal. You're going to tie it up in a process that you really don't want to go into. So if you are re-registering, or if you're going between two systems, you really want to make sure that it's identical in the registration, down to the names, the punctuation, everything. And we'll try to answer some questions about that if there are any as we go. But again, I want to emphasize this is not something that is run by the embassy. It is something that we have to use as well. And it really isn't, it's not as hard as it might seem. There's a lot of language around it in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. So I see in the chat that there may be some questions. I'm going to stop this screen share for now. Is it possible to get a copy of the slideshow? I think so. We can look at that as we go. I'm just looking through the questions quickly. The link for the funding opportunity is here in this chat. Copy of the slideshow, Duns and Sam. The information about what is SAM is in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. You have to kind of read through some of that very dense language in there to understand that. This is designed for U.S. expats and South African citizens. The key thing is not who is applying. The key thing about who is applying is rather that they're a nonprofit organization. For-profit entities are not eligible to receive funding under this opportunity. It's pretty uncommon that we would give money in any case as a federal award to a for-profit entity. And nor can an individual apply as an individual, but on behalf of a for-profit entity. We'll look very closely at that. All these are specified in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. If this is designed for US expats or South African citizens, that's really not relevant. Note that if a US citizen applies, there is a US tax burden. That's also not something we can advise on, but I just like to flag that for applicants because sometimes people get a little surprised when they get the tax documents after receiving an award. I heard that it takes some time to register for DUNS. Who can help us apply? Again, that is not something that we can coach or help with. The instructions are very straightforward on the registration website, which is contained within, there's a link in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. I really think people overthink it and get nervous about it when they don't need to. It's just a lot of reading and some document gathering that has to go into it. So the prep work is actually probably more onerous than the actual application. It usually takes, maybe my colleague can weigh in the chat box, but I think it usually takes between 15 and 30 days to get the registration back with approval. Sam, yes, thank you, Maureen, for commenting on what is SAM. Do you accept proposals from Eastern Cape? Yes, in the Notice of Funding Opportunity, that's one thing I wanted to deal with. Number one is in the funding opportunity, there are submission instructions. This is a nationwide, South Africa nationwide program. So for example, if your audience is in Eastern Cape or you're based in, let's say you're based in KZN and you want to do the project in Eastern Cape, that is not a consideration. Geography is not something that we're looking at in this particular application process. It will when we do the review and we do the evaluation, but this opening, this funding opportunity is nationwide, and that means that audiences and applicants from all parts of South Africa are invited to apply. We will accept the applications. One key thing is maybe some of you have worked with consulates or the embassy before, and you know people within the embassy because you have had, or consulate because you had a previous award. The application should not go to anybody that you know. It should be submitted to the pretoriagrants@state.gov email address that is in the Notice of Funding Opportunity. So I think it's really important that yeah, you follow the instructions for application to the T as they're stated in this application or in the notice of funding opportunity. Can social enterprises apply? Yes, if they are nonprofit. If you're registered as an NPO in South Africa and you have the documents to show that, I think that doesn't really matter as long as that criteria is met. We tend to like entrepreneurship, particularly social entrepreneurship, and you'll see that's a theme embedded in the notice of funding opportunity. The link to this recording will be posted on the website. It'll take us a little time to do that, but yes, we will be posting a link to this. We can also post the presentation. I don't see any problem with that, but we'll figure out the way to do that. It will be posted, though. This recording will be posted in the same place that you see the funding opportunities. Somebody has a question. One of the slides we mentioned that we do not accept scientific research. Scientific research under education, that is within a university. So, you know, that's a pretty specific question. Scientific research means, like, I would think when we talk about scientific research, we think about, you know, vaccine research. That's a big one right now, of course, or health research. This is not designed to support research. So, for example, somebody wants to go somebody's a researcher here and wants to go to a university in the United States and do scientific research there, that's probably going to be tough for us to fund, just because we do not fund scientific research or programs that are only for the purpose of research without some actionables on the end of it. So, you know, that's a pretty specific question, but I lack examples to be more clear. But I think scientific research will remain something that we're not going to be able to fund. There are some links in the chat box now for DUNS and NCAGE and the SAM system. All this information is in the chat box, but also contained in the notice of funding opportunity at the links provided. So let's see if anybody has a question. I think please raise your hand if you want to speak, or just drop it in the chat box. One thing I want to note is that you do not have to apply for the maximum amount. We have some minimums and maximums of what will be funded. Anything within those two is perfectly acceptable for an application. In fact, we're pretty good at this. We see right through when people pad their applications just to meet the maximum, you know, with all kinds of things that are tertiary to the actual program, or maybe not absolutely essential to the program. So be careful about that. Because what we really want is an honest application that captures in the budget. And here we're doing statements of interest, so you don't even need to submit a full budget. But when you estimate your budget, if everybody comes out at, you know, $24,999 US, we kind of see what's happening there. So you really need to only apply for what's essential for this specific program, not to do organizational enhancements or sort of other, you know, things that are loosely related to the program and its desired outcomes. Somebody has asked, how about funding research between US-based universities in South Africa that aim to develop a program for care workers? You know, I think you really want to reread the funding opportunity on that. That is not one of our focus areas. Care workers, capacity building in some cases can be, but you really want to have a clear deliverable that answers some of the, you know, some of the requirements of the funding opportunity. So again, I would be really careful with things that are, you know, going to be harder for us to understand as relevant to our goals, which are clearly outlined in that notice of funding opportunity. Do you need to register with SAM and DUNS first? You should. At this stage, it's not mandatory, but it will be once we review them and go forward. And we're working on a very tight timeline. So, for example, if we determine that we want to fund these, you know, or want to proceed with conversations around funding the proposal, for which you'll submit a statement of interest by May 30th, you know, you're going to want to get serious about that really quickly, because as we said, it can take some time, and we will have some deadlines for you for applications of the full proposal. Maybe one of my colleagues can drop that deadline into the chat box. I don't have it on the top of my head at the moment, because at this point, we're really only talking about statements of interest. A lot of times people will ask us why we would choose between a statement of interest and a full proposal. Because a lot of us in the embassy have actually worked for nonprofit organizations in the past. We recognize fully that your time is money. We also recognize the opportunity cost. If you're focused on putting together a whole application for something we're really not going to be interested in, there's a real cost to the organization in terms of what you could have else been doing during that time frame. So we want to respect and appreciate and acknowledge the investment that goes into a full proposal, and we only need those when requested. So please do not go above and beyond the requirements, because we'll take a look in this application process. We'll evaluate the statements of interest. We have lots of experience with this and a really, really good team of South African colleagues who can easily see when something has a lot of potential. So really, the reason we want a statement of interest is to keep things simple for us as well as for the applicant organizations. The link, contact with someone who can help with first-time applications. So no, there is not. And that is because we have a law that says we're not allowed to coach or provide specific guidance to applicants, in the interest of transparency and fairness. That's why we do these calls. We really cannot treat any one applicant different than any other applicant. What we do for one, we must do for all. And we feel very strongly and very committed to that, because it's just for us, it's an ethical question. If I'm giving applicant A a lot of specific guidance and applicant B didn't get that, applicant A clearly has an advantage in what is meant to be a fair and transparent process. So we're very, very strict with ourselves about that. And we appreciate, especially for first-time applicants, that this is a complex process. But really, if you follow the instructions in the notice of funding opportunity, which is why it's so long and why it's so dense, I understand that it's very, very thick text and there's a lot to contemplate in that notice of funding opportunity. That is because we are trying to provide as much clarity for all applicants, whether you're first time or 10th time. We want to make sure that everyone has the same understanding of what we are looking for. Yes, Jessica, I see your question. Statement of interest is due May 30th and not a full proposal. We will advise if a statement of interest is advanced to the next round. We will provide lots of clarity in our response on what the dates and deadlines will be around the next phase. Can payment, if when awarded, be deposited into a U.S. bank? I think so. Maybe one of my colleagues can answer that. It's in reply to Tim. I believe so. I think there's a couple more paperwork steps involved. We don't do it that often. We're been pretty focused on South African organizations and frankly have not had that many US based applicants. That is not because they're not welcome or because we don't want to work with them, but just rather the way things have unfolded. Yes, okay, so my colleague Mark, thank you Mark, is answered. Timeline is on page 3 of the funding opportunity. My apologies for misspeaking on that. And we can pay into a US bank account. So if there are other questions, we'll allow just a few minutes to deal with those questions. I want to remind everybody the distinction between development and public diplomacy is often marked by American content and clear outcomes and outputs that do not pursue development goals. So I would encourage you to really read into the statement, the notice of funding opportunity to really understand what it is we're trying to do. And not mix those, because that's really one of the main criteria, is don't neglect how you're going to have American component, American content and an American component in your program. I would also encourage anybody who is considering applying to please review American Spaces. There's, if you just Google it, American Spaces South Africa, perhaps one of my colleagues can drop a link into the chat box. American Spaces are often really, really good platforms for engagement with South African audiences. It's a built infrastructure with high tech capacity to do everything from podcasting to digital video conferencing. I think something like this is fine, but there are better ways to do educational or informational or cultural or journalism programs across a wide geographic area. And a lot of that technology is for free for the use of all now, even as applicants and not partners yet. At the American Spaces. So if you don't know about American Spaces, now would be a good time to really understand those and how they can be folded into any application that you might make. There are American Spaces in a number of locations across South Africa, namely Pietermaritzburg, Pretoria, Mamelodi, Bloemfontein, Soweto, Johannesburg, Cape Town. Yeah, I think that covers them all. I think so. There's 2 in Johannesburg. So I think, you know, if you're not familiar with American Spaces, researching that really does, and including American Spaces really does show that you've done your homework and are interested in a substantive American component in your application. Again, the recorded presentation will be available at the same link where you find the application or the notice of funding opportunity. And we will put the slides there as well, though they are embedded in this recording. I'll give just a few minutes for any additional questions. If anybody wants to raise their hand or drop in the chat box, we certainly have time to do that. Again, I'll remind you, please follow the submission instructions carefully. They're outlined in detail in the notice of funding opportunity. It is very important that you submit to the Pretoria grants@state.gov email address and not to anybody, or deliver a package to the consulate. Those applications, especially if something comes on a disk, we will not review it. The application has to be submitted in the manner specified in the notice of funding opportunity. If my colleagues have anything they'd like to say, please let me know and I'll unmute you. It looks like we have exhausted the questions from the group. I'm so happy to see so many people on this call. We're really serious about building bridges between the US and South Africa, and without partners, it's a lot harder to do that. As a university, do you need to make one registration? That's a complicated question. I think it depends on how the business units of each university are structured. We do see multiple registrations based on faculties or based on institutes within an organization. That is really the university's decision. That is the applicant's decision in those cases. What we care about is that there is a valid registration. How it's divided between a large organization like a university is not something we want to advise on, but we have seen a number of ways to do it. My recommendation would be to contact other universities and see what they do, and sort of determine within the organization what would make sense. All right, it looks like we do not have any more questions. Again, this recording and the slides and the notice of funding opportunity will remain posted at the website, and the link is now in the chat twice. If there are other questions or concerns, remember that what we say for one, we will say for all. If you email us with a question to the Pretoria Grants inbox, it's very likely that we either A, will not be able to answer it, or B, will answer it and then post both the question without your name or your organization or anything, and the answer at the same link where this recording will be. We're very committed to transparency and fairness in the process. It looks like that is the end of the questions. Thank you to my colleagues again for your responsiveness in the chat box. It's hard to talk and type at the same time, and we really look forward to your applications. We want to know what you're thinking about, how you would interpret what the program areas that we've outlined, and how we can build those linkages between the United States of America and the Republic of South Africa. It's a very important policy country for us, and we're excited to have the opportunity to work with new partners as we go forward. I think that's all. Thank you, everyone.